Welcome to Conservation Connection, the show where we do exactly what it sounds like, connect you to people working in the field of conservation. I'm Sarah Catherine.
And I'm Chance.
And this is this week's episode. Throwing it back to last week, though, Chance, would you rather be a sea otter or a sea lion?
Sea lion all day, every day.
Really?
Sea otters are like, I don't know, maybe I am a sea otter because they're relaxed and like they hang out and lounge and stuff.
Has like the golden retriever vibes.
Sea otters or sea lions?
Sea otters.
Otters do?
I think just because of the hair, like similar shaggy hair, you know?
See, I would say that sea lions have more of a golden retriever vibe because...
They bark?
Well, that's a good point. No, not because they bark, but because they're so dang playful and energetic. Like, I don't think of sea otters as energetic. I think of them as relaxed. But sea lions, they love to party.
That's fair.
Sea otters are more chill and laid back, and I feel like I resonate more with that. But, I mean, who doesn't want to have the energy of a sea lion all day long?
Yeah, I feel like both can have like their loungy moments and their party moments. You know, I've seen plenty of sea otters just having a ball.
That's fair. What about you? What would you rather be?
I think a sea otter. Notice I didn't throw seal in there, though, because they're my favorites, and you would have picked that just to be like, because that's your favorite.
That is true. Yeah, very true. But this week, we are not talking about sea otters or sea lions or seals. We're talking about sea turtles, which is a pretty cool field of conservation. I think a lot of people have heard about, like, save the sea turtles and all that, especially with the straws thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But this week we get to talk a lot about studying sea turtles when they come up on land to lay their nests.
Yeah, absolutely. This was actually a really fun and kind of cool episode for me to do personally, because one of the people that we interviewed during this episode, I actually knew when I was in high school. So you obviously know, of course, because you're married to me, that I used to sing in a tour choir called Spivey Hall. And we went to places like China, Europe, and also, you know, places around the U.S.
I mean, like, my wife can sing.
But Will was also in that choir with me. So, you know, I knew him in high school. He was a few grades behind me. And we just kind of stayed in touch over Facebook, but reconnected for this interview. And it was just a really fun moment to be able to like see him reconnect and like be working in this really similar field and have that background together.
Yeah, it's always fun to get to work with people a few years down the road. It's always a cool time. Yeah, Will and David from Georgia Sea Turtle Center at Jekyll Island were just super fun to talk to, very knowledgeable about sea turtles and like the issues they're facing and also the major triumphs that we've seen over the last 40 years or so of sea turtle conservation.
Yeah. And it was also kind of a funny episode. I guess it was kind of like full circle moments for both of us, like in a way. Mine wasn't really full circle, but we talk about diamondback terrapins in this episode, and you have worked with terrapins before.
Yeah, actually, weirdly enough, I've worked with both terrapins and sea turtles. So diamondback terrapins are the only brackish water turtle in the United States, meaning that they live in kind of salty water, but not ocean salty water. So they like live where the rivers and the sea meet all along the east coast of the United States. And I used to, in my undergraduate, I participated in the longest running, at the time, diamondback terrapin study program in the world at Davidson College, which was super fun. I mean, field biology is just a blast if you're into it, because I was just out there with nets literally crawling through the mud of these salt marshes, trying not to get cut up by like sticks and all this sort of stuff, and catching turtles so that we could measure them, figure out if we had ever caught them in years past, so that we could have an understanding of individual turtles. So basically what we would do is we would catch them and mark them and then release them. It's called a mark recapture study. If you come back the next year and you catch the same turtle again, you know that it's been there for a year. If you come back 15 years later and you still catch the same turtle, you know, hey, this turtle is hanging around here, and there's a lot of what we call site fidelity, where they stay in one place over their lifetimes.
Was this also where you got bit by a baby alligator?
No.
Dang, I was going to say you were also part of a mark recapture study.
Right, yeah, because the alligator definitely marked me. I do have scars from like cutting myself on, like I said,
barnacles.
Yeah, oysters and sticks in the pluff mud and stuff like that. But no, it was a really good time. And then like I said, I also used to work with sea turtles in the Caribbean. I used to work with a company called Sea Trek BVI. Shout out to Captain Monk. Angie, y'all were a big part of me learning to love the ocean and learning how to do real marine science. But what we would do is we got trained by the government to catch sea turtles and do the same sort of thing where we were catching them, measuring them, marking them so that the next time a researcher catches them, they can see where that turtle has been and how they have changed over the years. So it was really fun to get to spend like an hour chatting with Will and David about turtles.
Yeah, Will and David were both just so knowledgeable and so much fun to talk to, honestly. This is a really fun episode. We hop back and forth on a couple different topics, so not only turtles, but also this ecosystem they live in and the threats that these turtles face.
Yeah, it's funny because it's almost a throwaway line that comes up in the episode where Will describes some of the animals that are eating baby turtles, basically. And he mentions, like, there are some native species like raccoons and non-native species. And it kind of sent me down this rabbit hole because afterwards we were chatting with David and he was like, armadillos, one of the species that dig up turtle nests, are not actually native to Jekyll Island, which was surprising to me because I'd never heard of them as an introduced species. And it sent me down this rabbit hole. And now I'm going to take you down along with me to chat about armadillos before we get to sea turtles.
Yeah, well, I know we've talked about armadillos before and that they weren't always here. And like kind of what I had heard is they were in South America and they have slowly just made their way higher and higher. I don't know if that's true. What did you find out?
Okay, so a lot of this information is coming from a book called The Nine-Banded Armadillo, A Natural History by authors Lowry and McDonough. But basically what happened is for a long time, nine-banded armadillos were just in South America. And then the connection between South America and Central America in Panama happened like a couple 100 million years ago, and they started to migrate their way further and further north. So there's accounts of armadillos in Mexico as far back as like the 4th century AD. So a long, thousands of years ago, we know that there were nine-banded armadillos in Mexico. But the first time that we saw armadillos in the United States proper wasn't until 1849. And actually the person that documented them is John James Audubon, more famously known for documenting a lot of birds. So he saw armadillos in 1849 in very, very South Texas. And that's the first time we saw them cross the Rio Grande. We're not really sure how that happened. They may have found a shallow area and waded across. It's possible that they ended up being carried across the Rio Grande.
By who?
By European settlers that were doing a lot of travel in the area, or by possibly native Mexicans that were now had trading partners in the United States at this time.
Like accidentally or as like pets?
Probably the most likely answer would be as a food source, because they are edible.
But they were like still alive when they brought them over.
Right, exactly right. Because then you don't have to preserve the meat if you can keep them in a cage.
That's fair.
Right. So we know that there were armadillos in Texas in the mid 1800s. There's also a fair amount of accounts of like roadside zoo type things in central Florida, like the east coast of Florida, central Florida, around the 1920s. And we know that many, maybe several, we're not sure exactly how many, but armadillos were released into the wild in central Florida in the 1920s. So you kind of have this two-pronged thing where armadillos were introduced by people into Florida in the 20s, but they were also very possibly naturally migrating into the United States a little bit earlier than that. And you had these kind of two different populations that ended up both growing northward and meeting in Alabama and the Florida Panhandle around the 70s. And that's also about the first time that we see armadillos in Georgia or on Georgia Barrier Islands is in the 1970s. So it's a question of like, do we consider them native because they've been naturally expanding their range for thousands of years? Or do we consider them introduced and therefore naturalized, which is different from native because humans helped them along the way? And the scientific community says that if we have any evidence that they were not here and then they were here, we consider that naturalized, not native.
Interesting. I kind of feel like I'll need to draw a timeline to be like, okay, we're in South America. It's like this whole journey to getting here.
If you're interested in learning more about this, I really, really recommend the book, The Nine-Banded Armadillo, A Life History. I found it on Google Scholar, but go pick up a copy. The first couple of chapters give a really cool overview of kind of where armadillos were and where they are now and how quickly they're expanding, a lot of scientists think that their northern reach is going to hit like Ohio because they don't have a whole lot of body fat, so they can't hibernate. So they can't handle really cold winters, they die, which is why they did really well in South America, but now they're able to push further and further north into colder and colder climates.
Yeah, well, that was kind of a big deep dive into this part of the episode that is like just a random, like it's, 5 seconds in there, whatever, talking about like raccoons, armadillos, hogs, stuff like that as predators. But we thought it was really interesting and wanted to dive into it a little bit more.
And in my defense, armadillos were originally classified by some scientists as a type of turtle because, I know, right? Because of their shells. We've eventually figured out that's not true. They're mammals. But so this could be the all turtles episode.
I wonder if that's why, like in our gopher tortoise episode, she talks about accounts of people seeing gopher tortoises like swimming out to sea to get fleas off. I wonder if they're actually armadillos.
Very possible.
Probably not, though.
Probably
anyway,
not.
Don't listen to anything I say.
One final armadillo fact that I want to leave you with that I mentioned to you while we were driving to go get coffee earlier today is that in German, armadillos are called Panzerschwein, which means armored pigs.
Wow.
Panzer is armored and Schwein is pigs. Panzerschwein.
The Germans make up great names for animals, is what I've learned in these past few weeks.
Yeah, that's very true. And with all of that, enjoy this episode interviewing David and Will at the Georgia Sea Turtle Center from Jekyll Island. We are sitting here on Jekyll Island with David Zailo and Will Hicks. David is the research program manager at the Jekyll Island Authority Georgia Sea Turtle Center, and Will Hicks is a research technician here with the Georgia Sea Turtle Center. So thank you guys for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely excited to chat with y'all.
Yeah, we're so excited to have the opportunity to not only be down on the coast, but to visit y'all here at the Georgia Sea Turtle Center and kind of get a sense of what it is that y'all do. I know the work that you do is multifaceted, so we'll just dive right in, and maybe y'all can start by just telling us the mission of the center.
Absolutely. So the Georgia Sea Turtle Center, we opened to the public in 2007, so we've been open for almost 18 years now, and our mission relies on a three-tiered system of rehabilitation, education, and research, and it's all aimed primarily at helping and saving sea turtles and diamondback terrapins. We want to do that on the ground where we can with our research, education, and veterinary medicine, but also we want to inspire people in the outside community to be better stewards of the environment.
Since y'all have been open since 2007, have you been here since 2007, David?
I started in 2010 as an AmeriCorps member as part of our internship program, and
cool.
I've bounced back and forth between here and Athens, Georgia.
Okay, nice. So I always love to ask this question when things have been around for kind of a long time. 2007 isn't that long ago, but long enough. How have you seen things change over your time here? Or have you seen things change?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And yeah, change is a constant in the world of conservation and ecology and management. And down here in Georgia, things are certainly changing, and thankfully for the positives in a lot of ways. When I first started here in 2010, we had around 100, just over 100 sea turtle nests here on Jekyll Island. And since then, we're seeing an increase year after year after year. And, currently the past 2 years were our highest in Jekyll and Georgia's history. So that's dating back to the 1980s. So we have a pretty long-standing record of recording and managing these sea turtles here in Georgia. On a more local level, just seeing the growth in impact we have as far as our research programs, seeing the things we've learned through collaborative partnerships with outside institutions and organizations to help us better protect and conserve these animals is extremely rewarding.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, we even saw a school group here when we pulled up. So I know y'all are leaning hard into that education, and I'm sure all the kids love to come here and learn about the sea turtles.
I mean, who doesn't want to skip school for a day to go see sea turtles, right?
Yeah.
It's got to be the coolest day of the year. And, as somebody with a research background as well, personally, I love seeing research institutions that lean so heavily into education, because I am not doing research, which I love to do. I would rather be in the pluff mud, smeared and covered and hiding from the gnats, but collecting data than, not doing that. But
I think that the education and the public outreach is so critically important that we need people that have the skills to understand the science and communicate it to the public to do that in every opportunity they get. So I really love to see that that's a big part of what you guys do here.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, do you mind talking a little bit about some of the educational aspects we do as part of our research duties on the beach?
Yeah, definitely. One of the big things we do is we have public education programs through the Sea Turtle Center. So we have like Ride with Dawn Patrol programs and our Ride with Night Patrol programs where folks can actually come out onto the beach with us and ride in the vehicles while we're out looking for these nesting sea turtles either at night or looking for nests during the day. We also have these sunrise walks and turtle walks with our education department. So folks kind of get in a group of about 20 people walking down the beach and typically run into us while we're on the beach and just give them a good education about, what we're doing while we're out on the beach and what we're looking for and some of the data that we collect.
So if I were a beachcomber out at dawn and I see you guys going out there and I walked up and I was like, hey, what are you guys doing? What would you tell me you were doing and why does it matter?
Yeah. So kind of my two big duties that I do with being a research technician here is working on our dawn patrols and our night patrols. So say we're out on the beach in the morning, we're hitting the beach right at 6 a.m. So it's a little early.
Bright and early.
We're usually back in the office around 5:30 in the morning, getting field gear together, getting in our UTVs and driving the entire stretch of the beach. So things we're looking for in the morning is these loggerhead sea turtle crawlways, right? So majority of the turtles that we see in Georgia are these loggerhead sea turtles. They're primarily nesting at night. So during our dawn patrol shifts, we typically only see their crawlways. So that's mostly the only evidence that we see that they were there. So we'll go up, investigate those crawls, look for what we call body pits. So when we're thinking about turtles crawling up onto the beach, right, they're coming out of the ocean, typically at night, crawling up to our primary dune line. So right where that sand starts to turn into a dune. They'll use their flippers to body pit, so moving sand around before using their rear flippers to dig an egg chamber, deposit about 120 eggs, cover it up, and then return to the ocean, never to be seen with those eggs again. So we come in, investigate that body pit and the different signs of nesting, locate that egg chamber with a really fancy scientific stick. So we actually go in we call it a probe. So we'll go in and push this probe into the sand and we're feeling for kind of a change in the resistance of the sand. So when they're digging, they're moving and excavating that sand out and then slowly, softly covering it back up. So we can just feel that
the
resistance
difference between the disturbed sand and the sand that's been there previously.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we'll dig in with our hands to, not pop any of those eggs. Look at that egg chamber, and then we'll actually go in and protect those eggs. So we cover that up with a nesting screen, put a sign there with a nest number. So we know, hey, this sea turtle nest has some nice information for the general public of the do's and don'ts with our sea turtle nests. Like, don't disturb these turtles if you see them. There's also a phone number you can call on there. Then during our night patrol programs, we are driving up and down the beach. We start at 8 p.m. and drive the beach until about 6 or 7 in the morning. So we are out there for about 10 to 12 hours.
Wow.
It is quite a lot, but it is some of the most rewarding work. And what we're looking for is those females actually coming up onto the beach and nesting. We're looking for them to start nesting so we can actually approach these turtles. And we'll work them up. We'll take some measurements. So how long their shell is, how wide their shell is. I use the phrase carapace, right? So we're talking science with turtles. That top shell is called the carapace. So we'll measure their carapace, how long that is. We'll get a head width. And one of the primary things that we're doing here is we're actually tagging these turtles. So, right, we have these flipper tags on these turtles. They're kind of like a metal inconel flipper tag, like a livestock tag you would put on a cow on their ear. We're also adding a pit tag or a passive integrative transponder up and underneath their skin and their shoulder area. So that way, if this turtle comes back in the future, we can scan it with a pit tag reader, get a long 15-digit code. We can go look at our database and see if we've encountered this female before and see kind of where she's nesting, how long she's been nesting.
And that's really important. The pit tag and the flipper tags are important, especially with sea turtles, because unlike other ocean charismatics like cetaceans, dolphins, whales that have individual tail flukes that you can typically identify them by those signs, turtles don't have that. It's very difficult to tell, especially if you're trading data sets across the Atlantic basin or further, to tell where this individual has been based on just their morphology. So by adding a flipper tag or a pit tag or something like that, it gives us the resolution of data to say this exact turtle was seen on Jekyll Island on this date, and now we're seeing it here, or it's come back to Jekyll this many years later, right?
Yeah. So one thing that's really cool that we have with this data is Jekyll in a whole, we have one of the longest running sea turtle tagging programs in the world. So we actually have tag records going back to 1958, when turtles were potentially first tagged in the world right here on Jekyll, which is really, really cool.
That's crazy.
Some of our records, we have turtles that were tagged in the 90s that actually came back onto the beach last year. One of our turtles, she first was encountered on Jekyll in, I think, 1996, and she was nesting last year. So it really kind of pays that testament of like how long these turtles really are living and how often they're nesting. So this turtle has been coming back to Jekyll, year after year and nesting.
It also talks about how long it takes to just do science, right? It takes years and years and years of data collection, especially on these organisms that have really long lives, to get an understanding of how they live their lives, where they're going, where they're not going, stuff like that. So it's really cool that you guys are kind of part of this unbroken chain of sea turtle scientists on Jekyll Island that, has been contributing to conservation here specifically, but also across the Atlantic as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you just mentioned, conservation, especially with these long-lived animals, be it sea turtles or cetaceans, it's a really takes a lot of concerted long-term effort to start seeing results. And so in Georgia, the Department of Natural Resources, they coordinate sea turtle nest protection and management on every single one of our barrier islands. And they started doing that in the 80s. And it's really just now that we're starting to see these positive returns, to see increasing numbers of nests, and we're producing more and more hatchlings each and every year. And it really seems like, we're building on the backs of successful management and conservation practices that began 30 plus years ago. So it really takes, like you were saying, a lot of concerted, dedicated effort to achieve good results.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Absolutely. And honestly, even to see results in your education program, I didn't come here like on family vacations for the beach, but I did go down to the Gulf Coast with my family for beach vacations. And I can remember being in like elementary school, and we would go out and see them patrolling for sea turtles. And like, that's where I fell in love with conservation and the ocean. And like, now Chance and I run a conservation education nonprofit and podcast. So the work you're doing, even though it may take like 10, 20, 30 years, whatever, for those kids to come back and be like, oh, my love for the ocean and like sea turtles started here, and now I'm back here doing it. It's a really cool, impactful program. And I probably wouldn't be doing what I am without programs like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, getting the general public to appreciate nature and really respect the environment is huge. And we see that impact every day and every night when we're on the beach. One of the big things that Jekyll does is we have a really strong, good lighting ordinance. So white lights and beachfront lighting can have bad impacts on nesting and hatching sea turtles. And so we try to restrict the types and amount of light that can get onto the beach. And as part of that, we have an initiative that Will is pretty familiar with, where we hand out these small red keychain flashlights to individuals. So if we see folks walking on the beach at light using a cell phone or a white flashlight, we try to dissuade them with that, with some positive education, just telling them, hey, do you realize there's sea turtles either nesting or hatching here? These white lights can be detrimental to them. And so we give them a little alternative. And it's even got to the point where, now people are so excited, when our teams hit the beach at night, we occasionally have little kids, running up to us and asking for some turtle safe flashlights that they can use that night on the beach. So
that's awesome.
It's nice.
That's such a cool solution, because I think that the environmental movement as a whole has been plagued by this kind of holier than thou. How could you do this? You're hurting the sea turtles, or you're hurting the elephants or the whales. And that doesn't get people to change their behaviors when they're confronted with somebody like that. And it doesn't help the cause.
Right.
But to be like, hey, did you know that, lights can disrupt sea turtle nesting behavior, which is, a big problem for their population. And here's your solution. It's a red light.
Yeah.
You can still be out on the beach and see. I'm not telling you to stop being on the beach. I'm just telling you to modify your behavior slightly so that you can continue and you get to feel like you're protecting sea turtles at the same time. Like giving them that ownership over it is such an important piece to getting the population and the visitors to this island on board with your conservation efforts.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I didn't even realize that my phone flashlight could be that disruptive. If I'm walking on the beach, I'm like, oh, what is this? I turn on my phone flashlight. I had no clue. Of course, we hear all the time about the lights on houses and stores, like you said, and that's super disruptive. But you think of those as these huge, big lights.
Right.
You don't really think about our tiny little handheld flashlights.
Which is actually a great point for me. I want to dive in a little bit. Can you talk to me about why lights are so disruptive to sea turtles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So sea turtles see color very differently from humans. So they're actually a lot more sensitive to blue pigments and blue light, which is present as part of the visible spectrum, but they see a lot more of it than we do. And so when we're on the beach at night, even though it will look pretty dark, occasionally for a sea turtle, if you think of what they're seeing, they're going to see a much brighter landscape around them. And so these white lights can confuse them and cause them to be disoriented. So in the case of adults, sometimes they will interrupt nesting attempts. They'll keep walking, and like Will mentioned, they'll body pit multiple spots. And with hatchlings, historically, prior to beachfront development, hatchlings were, when they were born, they would head to the brightest light on the horizon, which was generally the moon and reflection of stars over the ocean. Nowadays, oftentimes they're emerging from these nests and they're heading the wrong way. And so our lighting ordinance here on Jekyll helps us ensure that these hatchlings keep making it to the ocean. And we're doing really, really well with that. Every single year, we consistently have very, very few negative events with hatchlings.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Feels good.
Yeah, I bet. So I want to dive a little bit more into the turtles that you work with here. I know you mentioned diamondback terrapins, which I feel like Chance actually did research on diamondback terrapins in his undergraduate. Mm-hmm. And even though I've heard of them and I've seen them, I still don't think about it as oh, this is a turtle that we have on our coast, and that you would be doing research and working with them here even. So I just want to dive a little bit more into the turtles that you work with here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll touch briefly on some of our terrapin stuff, and then I'll let Will talk a little bit about some of our nighttime sea turtle tagging programs. And so as the research program manager here at the Sea Turtle Center, those two species are the main ones we're trying to conserve. So sea turtles are protected by the Endangered Species Act. These diamondback terrapins, they are not. However, they are considered a species of management concern here in Georgia. And so we still want to learn as much as we can about them. And similar to our sea turtle program, our diamondback terrapin program is extremely long running. It's been going on for over 15 years now, and the causeway here on Jekyll is arguably the most studied causeway for diamondback terrapin conservation here in the Southeast, only rivaled by some of the long-term projects that Davidson College runs up in North Carolina.
Thank you, Davidson. That is where I learned to be a field biologist, was on Kiowa Island, pulling seine nets, catching diamondback terrapin turtles.
Exactly, yep. And so the big issues these terrapins face, are one, pressures from commercial and recreational crabbing. They can unfortunately go into crab pots, and without being able to escape, they drown. And second to that is the main issue of road mortality. So here in the coasts, when we develop through salt marshes, we often have raised roadways which lead us from point A to B. And those roads serve as really attractive nesting spots for these turtles. So they need to lay their eggs just like the sea turtles above where the tide is going to be, so those eggs don't get inundated by water. And unfortunately, a lot of these terrapins will end up trying to cross roads, and so they can get hit and struck by cars. And so here at the Sea Turtle Center, we're uniquely poised, where we have an active research and education arm. As you guys were coming onto the causeway today, you probably saw some road signs that during the terrapin nesting season, we actually will fold those down, and they have flashing lights that will go off around the high tide each and every day. So that's where we see most of these animals crossing the road. When we see most of these animals crossing the road, it enables us to protect them. Additionally, if they are injured, we've got a full-time vet staff, so we can bring animals back. We can have our veterinarian and dedicated hospital technicians repair pretty gruesome injuries to their shells and rehabilitate them and give them a second chance. Additionally, whenever we find an injured terrapin that has eggs, we can extract those and we hatch them all to be females. As reptiles, their sex is determined by temperature. And since we're only losing these adult females to road mortality, we're creating females to push back into the population.
That's fascinating.
It's pretty neat stuff.
That's really cool.
It's amazing. Yeah. And I'll let Will talk a little bit about some of our beach tagging programs that we do with sea turtles.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add about our diamondback terrapins that I think is really cool with our program is we've added this kind of fencing on part of our causeway to kind of mitigate that road mortality that we see. So we have, you might have seen it when you first got on the island. That looks like almost black silt fencing on the sides. We have 1,000 feet on both sides of the causeway, and area where we see majority of those terrapins crossing. We've seen a pretty decent drop in the road mortality of those turtles in that area. So that's a project that I think is really fascinating that we've been able to work on.
That's awesome. And I want to take just a second here to give people listening a sense of what a diamondback terrapin is, because they're such pretty turtles. They're so cool, and they're dimorphic, sexually dimorphic. So you've got small males and large females that look very different from each other. And they act differently. So like my research was on looking at their microhabitat selections. So how do they, throughout the day, where are they spending their time? And the big takeaway from that was that, they're basking when they're cold, getting out into the sunshine, and they're getting back into the water or the mud when they need to insulate themselves. But males and females move differently because the females are larger and therefore don't have to move as frequently. The males have to get out and go get back in the sun because they cool off faster, and then get back in the water because they warm up too quickly. Yep. So they're a really neat species, and they've got all these interesting aspects to them that make the way they move through their environment very interesting, but also gives us lots of purchase for creating solutions like putting up netting or raising road strike mortalities to be female turtles that allow us to really respond to these challenges really well.
Yeah, exactly. And, these good conservation and management measures that we're able to enact, like Will mentioned, the fencing that we have on our causeway, we only learned where to place that as a result of 10 plus years of research on these animals and figuring out exactly where they're crossing and where they're moving. And, there's a lot of parallels between terrapin management, conservation, and sea turtles, and that it takes time, it takes effort, and ultimately one of the big things you want to do is change human behavior to elicit, positive behaviors and make people be good stewards of the environment. So those road crossing signs that I mentioned earlier, those are actually the first turtle-specific road crossing signs in the state of Georgia. And we see massive reductions in mortality when those are on and flashing. So it's great.
I bet.
That's awesome. Yeah. So to change gears to the other turtle species that we have here, which is very different from a diamondback terrapin, which, a big female might be a foot long, diamondback terrapin. Loggerhead turtles get much larger, have very different life histories. So can you just tell me a little bit about what is a loggerhead turtle? How is it different from other sea turtles? Why do we find them here in Jekyll?
Sure. So when we think sea turtles, right, we have 7 species in the world. Of those 7, we see 5 that are on the Georgia coast. So we have our Kemp's Ridleys, our loggerhead sea turtles, our green sea turtles, our leatherback sea turtles, and our hawksbill sea turtles. So those are kind of the primary species we see offshore on Georgia. But our main nester is our loggerhead sea turtle. So about 98% of the nests that we see in the state are laid by these loggerheads. Occasionally we'll see, a green sea turtle and a Kemp's Ridley, and even more rare occasion, a leatherback coming up. But specifically talking about loggerheads, right, they're our 3rd largest species of sea turtle. So they're getting, using the metric system, we typically see about 110 centimeters for an adult. That's roughly 3 to 4 feet long. So those are our adult females.
And how much do they weigh?
Our turtles are, weighing on average about 250 to 300 pounds for a fully grown adult loggerhead. They are big turtles. Kind of when we think the term loggerhead, right? That's a log and a head. That's kind of how they got their name. Is their head is just so massive compared to all the other species of sea turtles that we see. So when these turtles are coming up on the beach, their heads are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, like basketball size heads.
Yeah, they can get quite large. But yeah, these turtles, coming up on the beach, reach sexual maturity of when they're nesting about 30 years of age. So from, a small hatchling of maybe an inch or two long, growing up to, over 3 or 4 feet.
Yeah, very big. And they're one of the really cool things about loggerheads is that they're crustacean specialists, right? Like they primarily like to eat crabs and things with a hard shell, which is part of why they have that massive head, because it gives them the musculature to crunch through that, as opposed to something like a hawksbill, which is, a sponge specialist, or green sea turtles, which are like foliage specialists, seagrass specialists.
Lawnmowers of the sea.
Yep. And then we have loggerheads, which are like, oh, a blue crab, that looks tasty.
Absolutely. Horseshoe crab, that's my favorite snack.
Yep, absolutely. So specifically, what are some of the threats that we're seeing to loggerhead sea turtle and nesting sites here on Jekyll Island?
Yeah, one of the big threats that we see with loggerhead sea turtles is the fishing industry. So back in kind of the early 70s and 1980s, we were seeing a decrease in the overall population of loggerheads in the state of Georgia, and that population was decreasing quite a bit, and we were actually able to contribute that to the shrimping industry here on the coast. But one thing that was developed is what we call TEDs, or turtle excluder devices. So these are just these big metal grates that allow shrimp to pass through into the nets of these shrimp trawls, but actually stop those turtles from being trapped and drowning in those fishing nets, and give them a little escape hatch through the bottom of the net to be able to get out. And with the implementation of those TEDs, we were starting to see those populations starting to come back with the addition of our conservation and management programs on the beach. So going out, marking those sea turtle nests, protecting those nests, and getting kind of data on what's going on with them.
You mentioned something really interesting a couple of minutes ago when you're talking about your stick of science and what you do shortly thereafter. You said you put a screen on the nests.
Yep.
Can you explain to me why you're screening the nests?
Sure. So we have several native and non-native species that are predators to these nests. So some native species that we have here on Jekyll, we have raccoons, we have armadillos that, sea turtle eggs are very delicious. They have, I don't know from personal experience, but to these animals, they provide a lot of nutrients to them, right? So they'll sniff them out, dig those eggs up.
Well, it's like a little buffet. You said there's
definitely.
like 120 or
something
something
about
in there?
120 eggs per nest. So by adding that screen, we think the screen, it's, this fencing material has about an inch or two sized holes in it. So when these hatchlings do hatch out of those nests, they can safely get out of that screen and through. But things like armadillos and raccoons can't really reach their hands into it and dig up those eggs. Another thing that's threats on other barrier islands in Georgia are feral hogs. Unfortunately, feral hogs, they don't really care too much about the screen, and they just go in and...
They're a bit stronger than a raccoon.
Yeah, they bulldoze it, and if you see it, it looks like a bomb has gone off on the beach, and it's just destruction. But one thing, we have people going out and reducing those populations with lethal measures of removing those hogs from the beach.
Right, because part of the game of sea turtle conservation is I always forget, are they R selected or K selected?
What do you think?
I think there are selected. Is that right?
Yes.
I really, you're a professor. I like this. So what I mean by that is that some species have very few offspring that they put a lot of energy into raising. Think humans. We have 1 to 3, maybe more kids when we have the resources to have them, and we put a lot of energy into making sure that those few individuals make it to adulthood and can continue on the line. Sea turtles are on the very opposite end of that spectrum. Like you were saying, 120 eggs in a nest, and goodbye, good luck. I hope to see you in the ocean someday. And so when you have all of these young clustered together, these eggs in one spot, a single mortality event there where a raccoon gets in and just damages a bunch of eggs, or a hog gets in and clears the whole nest, represents, really cutting this group off at the knees in terms of what percentage of those. Even though a lot of those may not make it to adulthood eventually, at least they have a fighting chance out in the ocean. But if they're being destroyed while they haven't even hatched yet, it really depresses sea turtle population levels as a whole. Am I pretty on?
Yeah. So, I mean, sea turtles are a bit of an anomaly in this regard. So, you were talking about this theory of R versus K selection. So generally, animals that are really long-lived will not produce a lot of offspring. They'll produce few really high-quality offspring. So think things like elephants, humans, large mammals, whales, things of that nature. Whereas sea turtles, they live a really, really long time, but they're also producing a ton of eggs. And generally, those types of strategies are things you would see more in things like insects, where they're not living a long time, but they're producing tons of offspring. It's a numbers game at the end of the day. And so these sea turtles, they're a little bit of both. And it kind of parallels, our conservation strategies for all these animals too, is it takes a lot of very different aspects to make things work. We have to protect them on the beaches with various methods, but in the ocean, they face completely different threats. So it's really a multifaceted effort.
Yeah, because you have one adult female turtle that can live, I don't know, what is a good estimate for age span?
So 50 plus years, certainly. We've seen some animals that we've encountered here on Jekyll, over 30 years after they were nesting due to tag returns. But a long-term estimate, it's really tough to gauge.
So let's conservatively say 30 years of reproductive time. So that's 30 years where this large female is going to be coming to a beach and nesting. How many nest sites are they typically doing per year? Do you know?
Yes. So we'll see 4 to 6 nests per female per year here in Georgia, generally closer to 4 per average. And, with it being a numbers game, with them producing so many eggs and having so few surviving, that's their strategy. That's how they try to make it. So these adult female animals and turtles specifically are by far the most important parts of these populations. They really drive growth and or losses in the population. So our conservation efforts on the beach here surrounds these nesting females. And on our causeway, it surrounds protecting our nesting female diamondback terrapins.
Right, because a single adult female represents well over, just doing quick mental math, 30 years of nests, 4 nests per year. It's 120 nests over the lifetime of the animal, about 120 eggs per nest. I'm not good enough to do that multiplication. But, that is a lot. So the loss of one single adult female represents literally tens or hundreds of thousands of eggs, or, babies that are not getting the opportunity to try to survive. So it really is, you got to work every angle of the problem.
Exactly. So, here on Jekyll last year, we produced over 10,000 hatchling loggerhead sea turtles, which seems like a really big number. But like you're saying, it's going to take them 30, 35 years to reach adulthood. And if our population survival estimates are accurate, 30 plus years from now, we may see 8 to 10 of these animals. So low survival when they're young, but when they're adults, they live really well so long as, they're not impacted by threats like Will mentioned, be it commercial shipping. But, we've seen a lot of positive increases in that regard as well. One thing I'd like to mention is Will brought up these TEDs, or turtle excluder devices, that are placed in these shrimp nets. And I think it's kind of a point of pride for Georgians in that these devices were actually invented by a Georgia native, a shrimper actually, called Sinky Boone. So, he saw this issue and started thinking of ways to solve it. And it seems like it's having a great impact when they're installed correctly.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Have you ever seen one, Sarah Catherine?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Do you remember what they look like?
I feel like you have one here.
Yeah, we've got one down in our education gallery, so we can take you all around and show you
we'll have
after
to take
this.
a few pictures to post when we bring out this episode. But in my mind, it's kind of like a funnel shape thing, right? And then they go in, like you said, and then they can go out on the bottom. I think I'm wrong.
we were thinking of a trawl net, right?
Yeah.
Like Sarah Catherine was saying, it's kind of, the overall shape is like a funnel, right? These TEDs specifically are kind of sitting right at the bag of the shrimp trawl net, so kind of towards the end. There's several different shapes that they can have. There's triangle shaped ones, there's kind of oval, oblong shaped ones, but it's kind of, think of an oval, has multiple bar grates. There's different widths, and there's been multiple studies that go into seeing, how far apart the bars should be to get the maximum amount of shrimp, but minimize the amount of turtles that are getting caught in the net. And, it's just this 2 or 3 foot in diameter oval grate, basically.
Yeah, they're super cool. And I love that it was a shrimper. I didn't know that it was a shrimper that invented them. People think a lot of times like the fishermen are the problem. They're out there, they're, catching accidental bycatch of turtles and dolphins and stuff like that. And they also don't want to be catching these animals. First off, they can't sell them. It doesn't make them any money.
Yep.
And it causes loss of production in terms of like, now I have to deal with the fact that I've got something tangled in my nets. And they're watermen and, they're water people. They love the ocean just like we do. And it's really cool to see somebody on the commercial fishing side step up and be like, I'm going to solve this problem. I think this would work. That's super cool.
No, it's great. Yeah, it's like a prime example of community-driven conservation.
Yeah. I have 2 questions before we kind of wrap up here. One of them is that you mentioned that you primarily see loggerhead sea turtles nesting here. Do you know why that is? Is there a reason that you see fewer of other sea turtles here?
Yeah, so kind of our other sea turtle species that we see in the Georgia coast, those Kemp's Ridleys and those leatherbacks and green sea turtles. We think kind of greens and leatherback sea turtles are more kind of tropical species. So the waters off the coast of Georgia, they're a little bit cooler than, say, South Florida, the Bahamas, where we see majority of those greens and leatherback sea turtles. So it's just, we're a little bit further up on the coast. So that's why these loggerhead sea turtles have moved up, and we primarily see those. And then with our Kemp's Ridley sea turtles, they're actually primary nesting in about a 200-mile stretch in between basically Corpus Christi, Texas, and Rancho Nuevo down in Mexico, and that's kind of their primary nesting habitat. We have seen some migration from the Gulf of Mexico to the Florida coast with those Kemp's Ridleys, and then just kind of slowly working their way up the coast.
Cool. The other question is, obviously for y'all and for us, like you work at the Sea Turtle Center, you care about sea turtles, like you want to protect them. You think they're like inherently important because they exist and they have been here and deserve to be here. But why is it important that we protect these animals and that they don't go away completely? Like what purpose do they serve?
Yeah. So when we think sea turtles, we can kind of look at them as like this kind of umbrella species, right? So multiple things fall underneath them, and we can use them kind of as an indicator of what's going on with the oceans, right? So with like our loggerhead sea turtles, they're potentially controlling populations of crustaceans because they're mostly eating those crabs and mollusks. With like green sea turtles, they're controlling populations of seagrasses. So if we're seeing a decrease in, species numbers and just population numbers in general, among our sea turtles, we can see, step back and be like, okay, these are very large animals that depend on, smaller things down in the food chain. Potentially there's something going on with our oceans that we need to look at. So by conserving these species, not only, in the ocean, but also on the beach, these turtles that come up, lay their eggs on the beach. Those eggs that they're laying provide nutrients for dune plants. Those dune plants are growing and holding more dunes. And we're talking about like coastal resilience. Our dunes are kind of our primary first line defense for hurricanes. So if we lose our dune ecosystems, we could see more major coastal flooding and higher impacts from hurricanes. So those turtles coming in are very important for our dune ecosystems.
Yeah, and to build off that, I think it all goes back to the concept of biodiversity and connection. Everything is connected. Look at the advances we've made in human medicine and technology by both synthesizing natural compounds from organisms to developing new materials based on nature. With a lot of these things, it's really tough to forecast what the consequences are going to be if you lose an animal. So for us, maintaining biodiversity, is just a net benefit for not just humanity, but for the world.
That's a lovely answer from both of you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the show with us today. This was a really fun episode, and I have been trying really hard not to geek out about the fact that I did really well, because they're sitting in front of us on the table are an assortment of turtle shells and a loggerhead turtle skull. We'll take a picture. We'll put it up on the Instagram so you guys can see it. But this has just been a really fun episode.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I just really like those guys. They were super fun to chat with.
Yeah, they were super fun, super nice, great to talk to about sea turtles and about the other work that the Jekyll Island Authority and Sea Turtle Center does there. We got to walk around the Sea Turtle Center and their hospital there on Jekyll with Will after the show. So yeah, it was just a lot of fun, and we'll be posting pictures on Instagram, of course.
The Instagram.
Oh, please don't call it that. It's awful.
Well, anyway, what did we learn this week?
So it was another kind of one of those random moments, just a couple words and one of the lines that we didn't really talk about, but listening back to the episode, I asked you the question, do sea turtles lay 4 nests during a season? Can they lay 4 nests during a season?
And the answer is yeah. A single female can lay multiple nests in a single year, which is, goes back to them really playing that numbers game, right? They're trying to pump out as many babies as they can because many of them will not survive to a reproductive age. So the more nests you can lay in a season, the more likely you are to have surviving offspring.
And 120 eggs per nest?
Yep.
That's just insane. Like, wow, Mom.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about a Mother's Day episode, right? Like almost 500 babies a year once you reach a reproductive age. And then you do that for 30, 40 years. Wild.
Yeah, I just thought that was crazy. And, David said it during the episode, but like I said, I guess I just didn't process it when he said it. But listening back, I was like, wait, is that true?
Yeah, super cool. I learned that sea turtle nests represent a really important nutrition source for dune grasses and like other plants that live in sand, which is traditionally a really nutrient poor environment. So growing there is hard, but it makes sense that having turtles come up several times a summer and lay eggs would represent a lot of nutrients. Even if all of the eggs make it, the egg shells, all of the fluids associated with laying eggs are really important nutrient sources for those dune grasses, which then protect the coastline because their roots stabilize that sand. So when a hurricane or a big storm comes in, the stronger roots they have, the less damage you get to everything that's inland from those dunes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like composting a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. It's just recycling those nutrients and moving them around the environment, which is why biodiversity is so important, is because you have so many ways to do that.
And just another little side note to throw out there, I learned this past week. So I grew up like going to the beach, experiencing these dunes and these sandy places when I was younger. And Chance was telling me when he was in college, he didn't know that you weren't supposed to walk on dunes. And I had this immediate reaction of like, what? How could you not know? Like, of course you can't walk on dunes. And I think about like where I grew up and there's these signs, you always see them and it says don't walk on dunes. These are protected habitats. But PSA for anyone who is ever in that type of ecosystem, sees the dunes, don't walk on them. They're really important, really fragile, but protect so much from hurricanes and big storms.
You're constantly learning. Even as somebody who's training in science in college, I didn't understand the importance of dunes or how fragile they are when you walk over them. So it's a lesson learned for sure.
Always learning.
Always learning.
And this past Sunday was Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day to all of the moms out there, and happy Mother's Day especially to our mothers.
Yeah, Mom, shout out to you. I would not be half the man I am today if you and Dad hadn't been so patient in raising me. And I really appreciate it. Love you, Mom.
And shout out to my mom. Thank you so much for all the amazing opportunities you gave me, you and Dad both, but Sunday was about you. So thank you specifically. Chance and I both love you and can't wait to see you again soon.
I want to take a quick second to make the announcement that sadly we are coming to the close of our coastal conservation season. Next week will be the final episode of this season, and then we're going to go on break for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's really exciting because we got to interview Dr. Sylvia Earle at EarthX this year, just a few weeks ago. So a nice, fresh episode for you. I know we've been posting about it a little bit on Instagram, so I think everyone is ready to hear that episode. And I think it'll be a really nice cap on this coastal conservation season.
I mean, what a cooler way to go out before the season break than with talking to one of the largest names in ocean conservation ever.
Yeah, super excited for that episode.
We've gotten some fun updates from our turtle friends at Jekyll Island since we recorded the episode. So we're recording this on May 13th. We're dropping this episode on May 14th. We just got some information from Will. He said that they've had a really good start to their terrapin nesting season. They've gotten quite a few nests already, which is super cool to see. And I know that back on the 5th, like you said last episode, they had seen their first sea turtle nest. And I think he said they're up to 6 nests now?
He said they're up to 6 nests and 6 false crawls.
So that's when a sea turtle is coming up on the beach, but decides that they're not quite ready to lay
one of their 4 nests of the seasons.
Right, exactly. So that's showing that there's an increase in nesting activity, which happens as spring starts to turn into summer.
And if you're local to Georgia or going to visit the Jekyll Island area, they have started their Ride with the Patrol and Turtle Walk programs. So you can purchase tickets to go hang out with them. I think he actually mentioned it during the episode. These programs where people can go out with them and look for these turtle nests, which is super cool. And if it's the right time of year, see some of the hatchlings.
Maybe when we go on break, we'll have a second to breathe and we can actually get out there and go see some nesting sea turtles. I think that'd be super fun.
Yeah, I would love that.
Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Stay tuned. You'll see us next Tuesday with an interview with Dr. Sylvia Earle.
Have a great week.